It really addressed an issue that I frequently get asked about, which is how do you have these conversations on race and racism, particularly with people who are close to you, your friends, your family, or even at work. I am not necessarily versed in the practical, direct way of doing it. And I thought that she handled it really well and relied on a lot of scholarship for helping you to navigate what are the best practices for doing this. So first, I'd like to say in an overview that she provided a really nice rationale and importance for the work, for doing this type of engagement. She's basically listed the human cost of people of color through rejection, pain, hurt, and death due to racism is significant. And that racism and everyday bias, prejudice, and discrimination contributes to a social climate that legitimizes extremists. Headlee cites that in 2020, the Department of Homeland Security said that violent extremists are the most persistent and lethal threat to the nation. That's on page 69, if you want to follow along. I have a couple of page numbers for you. This is a significant statement that violent extremists related to issues of race and racism is a rising threat to the nation. Okay. Headlee also said that people want to be included and they want to belong. This includes people who we may perceive as holding racist attitudes. And I want to highlight her discussion of the power of diversity that is on page 55 and through 56. Like similar authors, Scott Page, who wrote the diversity bonus, she states research that says diversity is strength. But the key to diversity is inclusion, so that we need to bring more people to the table, not silo them and put them in an area where we're saying they're untouchable. People can be brought in, and that is part of the goal of the book. One of the other things, so now I'm going to go through my points. Point one of the things that she highlights that really resonated to me is her discussion of the burden of people of color to discuss race and racism. And so that comes, hits very close to home for me, that I know scholars who during Black History Month are just overwhelmed with work. There's calls all the time for them to discuss race and racism and the civil rights movement and what have you. But it only comes during February. And the rest of the time, they're not necessarily being engaged. But the other part of that is that quite frequently we're in situations where a comment has been made and people kind of look to the person of color in the room to call that comment out. So the racist comment was made and all eyes turn to the person of color. That expectation is problematic. It's asking of the victim, the person who is wounded and hurt from the comment, to defend themselves against the attacker. It's kind of like asking an abused child to deal with their abuser without any help from the others. And most people of color are dealing with past and current trauma of discrimination and racism, or of close family members. So you're asking a lot of those people. And part of the importance of this particular work, Headlee is asking us to have more people engaged in addressing those issues, which means our white allies. Headlee clearly states that it's the responsibility of others to call out racist comments or situations and not just expect only people of color who are the targets and victims of those actions. For white people in diverse settings, racial settings, avoiding calling out racism or racist comments and expecting people of color to do this work is technically a form of white privilege. So, and my question is what happens when those racist comments are made in all white settings? So there's no person of color to address it. That means it's left to our white allies to do so. The second point I want to make is her discussion of racist or anti-racist. And here she's drawing on the work by Kendi, who has a book called Anti-Racism that recently came out, which I suggest you guys may want to take a look at. And basically she's saying, you know, if you're going to be silent on issues of race and racism, then silence is complicity. Silence and inaction create what Headlee refers to as an illusion of consensus, which ultimately sustains the status quo of racism and inequality.
I think at one point, didn't she say you are either racist or anti-racist?
Yes, which it's bold. It was bold when Kendi said it. I'm not going to disagree with it. I know that most people can find that troubling. But technically, we're being asked to choose. I mean, and this is actually not different also than Jim Wallace's book, America's Original Sin, where he's now asking Christians, it's like, okay, if you're not addressing these issues of race and social inequality in our society, then you're not following the gospel. You're not doing what Jesus asked us to do. So it's kind of, you know, there's no more sitting on the fence. So it's either you're allowing this to happen and you're complicit in this happening, or you're going to have to take action. Silence and avoidance won't solve racism in our society or lessen the significance of harm it has on people. Now, I'm a big fan of science fiction. So I'm just going to put that out there. Okay. And I know this sounds weird. It's like, well, where's she going with this? But as I was reading the book, there was a couple of things that came up that linked to the genre of science fiction that I'm going to share. So this is the first time. And it came after the quote I read on page 109 by Fred Rogers, and which states, if you could only sense how important you are to the lives of those you meet, how important you can be to the people you may never even dream of, there is something of yourself that you leave at every meeting with another person. That's Fred Rogers' quote from page 109. Now, after reading this, I thought of the movie Cloud Atlas, based on David Mitchell's book of the same name. The quote from the movie focuses on our shared journey as people on this planet, and it goes like this. Our lives are not our own. We are bound to others, past and present. And by each crime and every kindness, we birth our future. Basically, the quote implies that what we do matters. Our silence or our inaction or our actions matter. And it has an impact, even if we don't know what that impact or result may be. We're shaping the future through our interactions with others. This leads to the third point, which is overcoming fear. Now, Headlee uses a lot of room in the book to discuss fear and overcoming fear, to prepare yourself for having these conversations. And I definitely agree that this is something that needs to be discussed, and it's not really been discussed in other works. So there's fear among you to try to engage. And also there's fear on the part of the person who's made whatever type of grievous statement, racist statement, when they are called out on it. Headlee talks about people can't learn when they're in fear. So we have to be really careful about how we engage with these individuals who we would like to show that their racism is problematic. And so most of the book is, focused on that. But she also provides ways to address and diffuse those fears. Then there's a fear that you may have to engage with the racist. The issue of likability, which I really appreciated her just calling that what it was. that if you're afraid that people won't like you, Headlee asks you to reset your expectations and focus not on friendship, but on learning. This is on page 111. And this applies to your close friends and loved ones. She states that it is more effective to preserve those relationships through respect than to pretend you're in agreement, which is again, going back to this illusion of consensus. As Christians, I want to highlight just something that's kind of been on my mind. I think you guys are frozen.
No.
Hello? No?
Hello?
Okay. It looked like you were frozen. I was like, oh my gosh, I've lost you. Okay. Okay.
I was simply transfixed by the prose.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So as Christians, I want to kind of draw us back to the Bible, and it's filled with multiple passages telling us not to fear. And we need to take courage and rest in the faith that God is with us. So as we're engaging in these, you need to kind of overcome your own fear that what you're saying is going to be problematic or the person isn't going to like you. Just have more faith that you're going to be able to make it through. And I think with the guidance that Headlee is providing, I think you'll be okay. This leads me, of course, to my next science fiction book, right? Okay, so my favorite sci-fi book series is Dune by Frank Herbert. Yes, I was delighted with the movie. Thank you. As I was reading Headlee's discussion about overcoming fear, I thought of the affirmation in Dune called the Litany Against Fear, which I'm going to share. Hold on, I'm going to change page. Okay. Okay, so the litany against fear goes like this. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. I thought that was, I mean, it's really powerful when it's used in the books, but I think it's also useful for us here, that quite frequently we're not able to kind of move forward because of fear, and we must overcome some of these fears in order to do the things that we need to do in society, but also to address this major issue. And Headlee kind of helps us through this as well. Now, number 4, the majority of the book provides a step-by-step process on how to engage with your friends, neighbors, colleagues, and family members who make racist comments or hold racist views. The focus is to prepare you for a really direct and extended deep interaction with the person. The goal is to allow people to change their minds, not through statistics and facts, because those don't really work, but through sustained engagement. The goal is to reduce racism. Calling someone a racist doesn't lead to engagement, but it leads to defensiveness. And judgment and condemnation will not result in changing someone's mind or their heart. And it doesn't bring them in. It doesn't help to include them in this process. Now, to me, this seemed very, very, okay, wait, before I get there. I want to go by, on page 55, Headlee states that your enemy is racism, not the person. And in Christian terms, this can be translated into love the sinner, hate the sin. Change is going to take time. Change comes from connection and interaction with others through deep listening, respect, acceptance, sharing stories, and emotion. That's basically Headlee's approach. And the key to this process is increasing your own capacity for empathy for others. That opinion is not empathy. Sympathy is also not empathy. And Headlee provides several ways for you to increase your empathy for others, including the seemingly racist person that you hope to engage with.
What I want to just throw in a comment here, because one of the things from a biblical perspective, St. Paul talks about I planted the seeds, somebody else watered, somebody else brought the light, and all along God was giving the increase. So that part of, I think, what she was edging on against was that it's not about having one monolithic conversation that's going to change somebody, but even our little seed planting, even our little watering, because of what you said, it takes a long time, is important.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I also think that the parable about the seed falling on the rocks and the fertile ground and so forth also plays into this as well. That sometimes you don't have time. I mean, she even talks about, brief encounters where, there's no deep engagement, but in many ways, you're still kind of throwing out the seed that those type of racist attitudes are really not acceptable in our society. And she calls it out. This is not a sustained engagement, but you hope that that seed may take root and another person may come through who is in the position to have that sustained engagement so that change could actually happen. Now, the last thing I want to mention is that Headlee also provides plenty of encouragement because this is hard work. This is not easy work. And that addressing racism is continuous work. The racism in our society is embedded in our social institutions. It's in our culture and everyday life. And it has been established for the past 400 years. Changing such a racist system will take much time and effort. Headlee encourages you to prepare yourself first before attempting to have these conversations with others. I advise you not only to prepare yourself, but to ease into it. Don't try to address racism in every encounter. My advice is to identify a person or a setting where you'd like to start having these conversations. Make it somewhere you feel comfortable, perhaps at the next family gathering or maybe at work. And in Christian terms, I'm asking you to bloom where you're planted. Don't really go out of your way, make it people that are close and important to you if they're holding these particular views. And you might find that you can be more productive in those places. Headlee acknowledges that sometimes you're going to get the conversation wrong. She advises you to take stock in what happens or what happened and take responsibility if necessary, if it was your fault. Make an apology, a sincere apology, and try again. Basically, she wants you to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and start over. And she wishes us all good luck.
I think what's important for us to note as a Christian congregation that's reading this book that was not written from a Christian perspective or written by a theologian is that we provide some sort of theological underpinnings to why we're doing this. And I think for our congregation, we need look no farther than our people's window, the first word of which is go, because the gospel that Jesus proclaimed to us and left with us to go spread was a gospel of initiation, was a gospel that says these conversations need to start from somebody. And saying I'm a Christian and I don't want to participate is not really an option, because 2 Corinthians 5 talks about our role as ministers of reconciliation in a world that's deeply broken. And we see that we're surrounded by that when it comes to race. And so I have a number of underpinnings that I could certainly talk about, but I think for our congregation, we're supposed to take these things seriously. We're supposed to go out and minister to a world that's broken, especially when we have the gift, the charism of being a congregation that is diverse. Because in the Episcopal Church, folks, this is not common. Okay, so I wanted to make sure that we address that we are reading secular books on race, but we realize that we have a Christian obligation and challenge from our Savior to spread the word of love and the word of justice to the world. And it's anchored deeply in who Jesus was. We're doing a Bible study on Isaiah, as you all know, and that ministry of Jesus as being somebody who sticks up for the poor, the orphan, the alien in your midst, the person on the margin, is deeply embedded in Isaiah. And, Christians frequently call the book of Isaiah the fifth gospel, because Jesus quoted from it so much. And we see that as the most quoted Old Testament book, Hebrew Bible book that we see in our midst. So I just wanted to interject that I think it's really important as we study this, that this is, it's not hard to see this as Jesus's work.
Right. I agree completely. I'm done with my comments. So if we have questions, that'd be great. Or if you have questions.
I would like to invite questions. I also would like to invite observations. You laid out a wonderful 5-point, overview of things that hit you. And I want to invite people both here and people both online. In fact, let's see, I'll go to gallery view here. If you want to make a comment, put your hand up. If you know how to do that, if you go under reactions and hit raise hand. If you're here in the congregation and you want to make a comment, just come forward. I'll move out of the way. You can take your mask off and make your comment so our people here can see it as well. I'd like to start off with one comment, maybe while you all are thinking of yours. And Ivy, you and I discussed this, and this was a statement that she made on page 26, where she said, being anti-racist is not a status you achieve, but it's a skill that you acquire. Meaning that I don't just read a book and I'm anti-racist. I don't just go through a course and I'm anti-racist. But because of the depth, and she, I think, articulated this well, of prejudice that's embedded in our society, this is a lifelong practice. This is something that it's almost like an AA group where, you don't just say, oh, I'm done, but you need some support to go through it for the rest of your lives. And I think we've been trying to do that as a congregation by having regular book reads, by having our movie nights, by opening the conversation up, not just once and saying, oh, I got my certificate, I'm done, but to say that this is something we need to continue to participate in. So that quote really was one that stuck out for me. Is there anybody else who wants to make a comment or has a question? It's not often that we get such expertise here in the room. Then I will chime in again until I see somebody else wanting to. I would like you to comment, Doctor, on this comment. It was on this quote. It's from page 42. It says, racism is rarely a deliberate choice. It is often the result of unconscious thought instilled in our subconscious by a systemically racist society. Let me read it again. Racism is rarely a deliberate choice. It's often the result of unconscious thought instilled into our subconscious by a systemically racist society.
Okay. Yes. The issue here to me is the embeddedness of stereotypes within our society. That stereotypes have moved to a place where we are categorizing individuals based on half-truths or no truths. And we're using it as a shortcut for trying to understand the world around us. So the only real way to deal with that is to be cognizant of what the stereotypes in society are. One of the things I use when I'm teaching in class is part of an issue with the stereotype is the implication that all individuals of that particular racial ethnic group have those characteristics, whatever that is. And there is nearly nothing that all people of any particular racial ethnic group have full possession of. There is a wide variety among all groups. So the stereotypes want us to say all Blacks are this, all Latinos are that, all Asians are whatever, all Muslim are something else. And that is something that that's a way of, when you're thinking about it, if you can check yourself, it's like, well, that was a sweeping statement and maybe that's a stereotype and maybe I need to, temper that instead of kind of moving forward. I believe in that section she also talks about, we need to think more. we just literally need to think more before we speak. And yeah,
That's why I like that quote, because and I think she said, she used the analogy of opening a door. And if you had to stop and consciously think of, okay, I put my arm down, I twist and I whereas the racist comments that a lot of people make, they're just unconscious. They don't know that that's what they're doing. I found that a bit freeing, because I don't know of anybody who wants to be racist. I mean, it's something they want to.
I'm going to say that this is a little bit more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
It's some people have grown up with particular stereotypes about others that they actually believe, and they're relying on those to navigate through life. So in many ways, they may not necessarily intend to be racist, but if you're using these stereotypes, blah, you're racist. I mean, that's just what it is. And until you realize that these are stereotypes, you're going to continue to make these kind of problematic statements. So I don't know. I think calling them out and making a distinction between the statement and the individual is really quite useful. And that's what Headlee basically suggests, that if people are making these statements, they may not really know how offensive they are when they say them, but if you allow it to pass, then they're going to be reassured that the statement is fine, and this is how the complicity in racism actually happens.
Yeah. In the chat here, Carol says, while reading this book, I was driven to an online survey which asked me for my race, age, and gender. This bothered me and I quit the survey knowing your research. Are these box filling surveys any real help? And it was CDC.gov. Go ahead.
Most certainly, yes. I don't know what kind of survey it was. And I don't know who made that comment, I'm sorry. But I don't know exactly what that was that you were doing. I'm a little phobic about just generally doing surveys on the internet because you're providing too much information. But if this is a legitimate survey that is done by a large kind of research group or governmental kind of arm, yes, knowing your race, your gender, your education level and other things are important for us to understand how people are thinking within the society, how we can address particular issues. One of the things that I came across in my studies and research is that some societies don't really want to do this as well. So Germany is a case, France is another case where they're really kind of focusing on the collective, particularly the French. They want to say, we're French if you hold this particular culture and your race really doesn't matter. And so quite frequently, they don't ask questions on race on larger national surveys and so forth. If you don't ask the question, then you can't prove that there's racism or discrimination that's actually happening because you haven't enumerated the data. Okay. So, I mean, I know some people would love for us to move to a kind of race-free, color-free zone where we don't do this, or gender-free, and we don't ask these questions of race and gender. But if we didn't ask gender, we wouldn't know about gender, sexual harassment. We wouldn't have data on gender discrimination. We just wouldn't have that information. If we don't ask race, the same thing happens.
Okay. Cindy, I think you have a question now too. She's going to stand up here and ask.
Okay.
Oh, hi, everybody. I'm Cindy. After reading the book, one of the things that I thought was important is that we really shouldn't engage people on social media. It just feeds, it benefits social media's revenue stream, it sounds like, and it doesn't do any good. Face-to-face sounds like it would be better. So I found that very helpful. Second of all, of course, I think the same thing applies to whether someone's making an anti-Semitic remark or a sexist remark or whatever. I know I was with a friend when she says, "Oh, my Jewish doctor is doing blah, 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 blah." And so I said, "Well, you know, I'm really uncomfortable with you saying that." And I told her why. And so I guess for me, I feel it's comfortable for me to use that phraseology, saying it in like an I statement, like, well, you know, I find that remark racist, and just put it out there and just see what happens. And I do appreciate that you said have low expectations. You're not going to solve world issues with that remark, but I do think that it does plant that idea that not everybody thinks like you. And I think over time, and if enough people do that, that makes a point in itself. It might not be the whole victory, but you're telling them that not everybody thinks like you. Just because I'm white doesn't mean I think like you.
Right, right.
So I just wanted to put that out there that for myself, I like the phraseology of, well, I'm uncomfortable with that. Now, if someone makes a sexist remark, I wouldn't say that because my discomfort might be their goal. So I would just say, I find that sexist. I won't say I'm uncomfortable with it, but anyway, for myself, I find that at least it's a start. It just puts it out there, and I do what I can in that respect. And I do appreciate her statements of how to ask questions. I think if anybody's read that book, the book, I would go over that again. In fact, I made notes, how she said what kind of questions to ask. Don't ask really long, complicated questions with opinions. Just ask, well, how was that? Or, let them talk, tell me more. Get them to talk a little bit. But so I found that her list of how to ask questions and her suggestion about not engaging on social media, as tempting as that is, very helpful. And just getting out there and saying, I'm sorry, I feel what you said is, racist, sexist, anti-Semitic, whatever. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Good, good.
I found her example, Cindy, along those lines really helpful in that she would make an honest inquiry before she would say, like, that's racist. She would say, what makes you feel that way? How did you come to that conclusion? I know some people that might find that offensive because when you threw out the word racist, I find that racist. They're quick to say, well, you must think I'm racist. And that would quell them down. That's a nuance that she seemed to be interrogative, but in a way that was accessible. She talked about a guy at the dog park. She had a couple stories where she would say, oh, well, please tell me how you feel that way. I think I might know somebody who might be offended, instead of throwing out the racist word. I don't know. What's your feeling?
I agree. I mean, again, it's the comment might be racist, the person you're holding separate from the comment. That means that the belief or attitudes that they hold can change. And you're not singling them out for complete condemnation and rejection. You're giving them the opportunity to reassess, to think about what, their statement. The other thing, though, kind of piggybacking on what Cindy was saying, because I totally agree that, banter back and forth and trying to address some of these issues of the internet is soul sucking, and it's not effective. The internet is designed in a way that allows people to be bullies and trolls, and it's just not helpful. And it can be demoralizing to you to have that type of engagement. So I would suggest that you don't have it, just like Headlee. But I do want to say, one of the things I thought was really interesting is there was a place where she says, basically let them spill everything, all their racist venom, let it come out, let it see the light of day. Let them exhaust themselves with saying everything that they have to say, regardless of how offensive it might be. Which is really an interesting and kind of shocking kind of statement or approach, but it coming from sociology, in what we do in in-depth interviewing. Frequently, people want to be heard. they want to be valued and heard. They want their experiences shared. Now, after they've shared all of this stuff, you can then ask them questions about, how did they come to these particular beliefs or what have you, and start to probe a little bit more and maybe reclaim it as a constructive conversation. But I think one of the biggest things that we've done that has been a problem when talking about race is by kind of dismissing the person and their attitudes as being not valid. That's not different from when people of color say that they've had, discriminatory experiences or, really kind of ugly racist experiences. And, white people are saying, oh, no, it wasn't like that. They weren't there, they didn't see it. Basically, they're dismissing and invalidating the experience. In many ways, we have to give the racist, if this is really a racist person, the same type of respect, that their perspective may be valid. It still might be erroneous in ways that the conclusions that they draw were problematic, but letting them vent kind of thing can help clear the air.
And again, I'm looking no further than our gospel reading today, approaching these conversations with empathy and love for the other person. Right. Jesus is very clear, for he is kind to the ungrateful and to the wicked. And I don't know if your interlocutor is going to be classified as ungrateful or wicked, but probably less than that, that as a Christian, I think we're asked to be loving and kind in our conversation. And so that means thinking through, okay, how is this person, because as she's pointed out, you're just going to get cut off. I mean, if you start coming out with guns blazing, calling that person X, Y, and Z, or calling their behavior that which they're going to interpret as them, it's going to really be a cutoff. So I think as Christians, we have to be really mindful of the ways Jesus asks us to operate. And that is by loving and giving to others and putting themselves before us. I see that as another theological tool we have as believers to engage in difficult conversations like this.
I think Carol's hand is up. Carol, did you have something you wanted to add?
Who is that, Dr. Carol or Cindy?
Yeah. Carol Wells. Her hand's up.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Carol, her hand's up. Yeah. Hi, Carol.
Hi, I wasn't sure that it came through. So it's the first time I've ever used that. So I will confess that I did not read the entire book, and I am finding it very interesting, and it's causing me to want to go back, hurry up and finish so I could go back and read the rest of the afternoon. However, my question has to do with racist attitudes that people within one race have towards each other. Because I do believe that it is possible for an African American to express some, and maybe it isn't called racism, but to express some racist kinds of attitudes towards other African Americans. Does she address this issue?
She does a little bit. And she doesn't really label it completely, but that's internalized racism is what that is.
Okay.
And it's that African Americans and other people of color aren't immune to the racist kind of culture that we're living in. And you can internalize some of that racist talk and the stereotypes. It may not necessarily, you may not think it applies to you, but it may apply to others of your group. What I find very interesting is among various immigrant groups that they seem to jump into the kind of racist ideology that we have in this country fairly quickly after getting here, even though they have no experience with some of these groups beforehand. But it's because it's part of our culture and it is everywhere. So yeah, she does a little bit. I can't remember where that is in the text to kind of pinpoint it for you. But It is an issue. And it is an issue. The last time I checked that, I believe Ron Bird was working on at the national level, Father Ron Bird, to deal with, I think he was dealing with some kinds of workshops or something for African-American and other minority parishes to address the issue of internalized racism and what that does.
I think my own personal opinion is that it exists, not just among African Americans, but amongst even the immigrant populations that come here, and those who've been here and become acclimated versus those who are just now coming here. And I think it's, I don't know how it impacts the overall issue of racism, but I just find it an interesting phenomenon.
It makes it problematic for us to deal with this. And this has been an issue that I've had on the Dearborn campus. So as we try to, historically bring in people to talk about issues of race on campus, we're forever kind of constructing the discussion in this kind of dichotomy, or dual kind of situation. It's like black-white racism. And while that is the model that we're dealing with, there are other types of racism that are happening, or racist attitudes being held by other people. The other thing I just want to highlight, as somebody who studies immigrant populations, is that we perceive immigrants and people of color as a monolithic group. They have internal issues of prejudice and bias that are part of it. Within Latinos, for instance, Mexicans and Puerto Ricans don't necessarily get on all that great. But everybody can kind of come together and not really like the Cubans. So for other reasons, and the Cubans don't necessarily like everybody else. And there's issues of race among being Cuban, whether you're fair skinned or more darker skinned. There's lots of issues within Latin America of issues of colorism and class. Same for within the African Caribbean community, same for issues within Asian communities, that there's groups that are kind of in groups or more privileged groups and groups that are kind of out groups. So East Asians are kind of an in group seen as a model minority, while where this is within the group, not externally, right. Where the Southeastern Asians are not seen as desirable, whether you're Laotian or Cambodian or Hmong or what have you. Within the Arab community, there's, the groups that are a little bit more central, they have a little bit more dominance, particularly here in Southeastern Michigan, as opposed to the Iraqis, which are seen as more of an out group, a new group, or the Yemeni, which are a darker group, have a slightly different kind of culture, and pretty much the rest of the Arab world doesn't deal with them very nicely. So all of these groups, they're not monolithic. They have issues inside them. She's not addressing all of that in this text. She really is pretty much discussing, pretty much white racism, but not necessarily can apply to other groups as well who hold racist attitudes.
Edna has her hand up. Edna, do you have a question? And are you muted?
Is this better?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Just sort of an observation about fear. We discussed fear a little while ago, and about what, Jesus tells us about not being fearful. But I have to say, fearfulness is a huge, I think, obstacle in a way, in terms of our approaching others, being afraid of the reactions, being afraid of all of that some of you can relate to. So in many ways, being silent is the easier option to take. However, I have found lately, just in my own interactions, if certain people in their, maybe their comments or things that they say seem just so abhorrent to me and awful, I don't even want to have conversations with them, that if I can remember that a lot of what they are maybe exhibiting is based in fear, and a lot of that is coming from fear, that in a way, if we could just be sort of patient and listen, like you said, Ivy, in terms of letting them say what they want to say, maybe asking that question about what makes you feel that way, maybe we will discover what their fears are and be able to address that.
I totally agree. I think that, okay, so the elephant in the room around this conversation might be the election before of President Trump, former President Trump, and what happened in the aftermath of that election, and the kind of climate that started to develop. A lot of people who perceive themselves to be moderate or progressive or liberal really were baffled at that election. Most of the people of color that I know were not surprised. So this was the racism or the prejudice that we have in this country is right below the surface. It's held by way too many people. And he allowed some of that to come up and out and get the light of day. So there was not a whole lot of surprise. And combine that with the sexism that we have in the country, because you're running against, a female candidate, it's like, come on, it's like that's a no-brainer. But in the kind of analysis of the election and trying to figure out what happened or why people were believing the way that they were believing, I think there was a lot of dismissiveness that was going on, that there are people who feel that they are excluded from the society, that we are a society that is cosmopolitan, that is coastal, and there's preference for the East Coast or West Coast or Florida, I guess. And then there's the heartland, and that the issues of the heartland are not being addressed. The issues of the working class, particularly the white working class, are just not being addressed at all. So some of this is a fear of being left behind, of being not included, of being displaced by other groups, but where they used to be prominent and central to the political discussion, that their issues are now marginalized and there's new issues that are there. But that's a lot of fear, fear of not being included, of not having the things that are most important to them be discussed and valued. And this is a huge problem. And it's not going to go away overnight. And that this discussion on race is like bordering that, but there's this other kind of core thing. And the racism then becomes a scapegoat. You can blame those minorities, blame the Blacks, blame the Latinos, blame, these immigrants and so forth, for the reason why you don't have the power, the politicians aren't listening to you, nobody cares about your problems in, the heartland. You're blaming these other individuals. So, yeah. There was a thing that I also wanted to kind of mention as Edna was talking. Hold on, let me switch so I can find it again. That wasn't what I wanted to do. Hold on. I wanted to bring up the quote, the Nye Muller quote, which I think is important here for us overcoming the fear to engage with these individuals. You guys may know the quote. It's the first they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I didn't speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. We have to kind of address these issues. Otherwise, we're going to lose way more, and more people are going to be included than we think.
I think that's a phenomenal quote to end on. It's an hour. I know about Zoom fatigue, as I think a lot of us do, and anything over an hour is deafening. I would like to invite some folks here after we sign off here to answer a couple of questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to switch tracking or to some of these comments she had to make about diverse groups who argue and disagree make better decisions than those who just get along and win by consensus. I think she's got some really interesting things that she brought up. Maybe we can talk.
I do have one thing to say about that, which I thought I said, but I might not have made it into my notes.
Sure.
If you're interested in the diversity stuff, she's drawing on some other research that she does not necessarily cite. But I definitely am an advocate for this research. The Diversity Bonus by Scott Page is a lot of, he's a University of Michigan Ann Arbor professor who focuses on diversity and decision-making. And he does a lot of Fortune 500 company kind of work.
Yeah.
The other one is, I believe the last name, now I'm forgetting, is Johnson. But the book title is Inclusify, which is about belonging and inclusiveness, bringing people in, making them feel like they are part of the group, and why that is really important for decision making. Both of these kind of work hand in hand, that diversity is key, it's our strength, and we got to get over some of this other stuff, and so we can get to that. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No problem. Inclusivity by Johnson. I just put those in the chat box if you all want to jot those down. So Ivy, thank you very much. And I wonder if we might close with a prayer, if that would be okay.
My prayer? Thank you.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Lord, thank you so much for calling us together to have difficult conversations in many ways. Thank you for the gift of Dr. Ivy and the light that she sheds on this topic. We want to pray, Lord, a bold prayer, which is that you would use us, that you would inspire us, that you would give us the courage that's needed to have these conversations and the wisdom to have them in ways that will make a positive difference in the world. Bless us as we go from here and guide us into the ways in which you are calling to reconcile all the world into Jesus Christ, who is love. Amen.
Amen.
Plug for 7 o'clock tonight. If you want to join us for a movie in the St. David's Zoom room, we're watching Will Smith's hopefully Academy Award-winning role in the movie based on Serena and Venus Williams' father, Richard Williams. So please join us for that film. And thanks so much, guys. We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.